The Treaty of Versailles was supposed to be the final word, a document of iron and ink designed to chain the German eagle, ensuring it would never again cast its shadow over Europe. For the German Navy, the Kaiserliche Marine, it was a death sentence. Its mighty fleet, once the pride of the nation, was scuttled, surrendered, or scrapped. What remained was a token force, a coastal defense navy, shackled by humiliating restrictions. Capital ships were limited to a displacement of just 10,000 tons, a figure that, in the 1920s, barely qualified a vessel as a heavy cruiser. Bait ships, the titans that had ruled the waves, were completely forbidden. The message from the Allies was clear: Germany would never again challenge them at sea. But in the halls of German naval design, amidst the quiet bitterness of defeat, a different kind of thinking was taking shape. They weren't just reading the rules, they were reading between the lines. They found a loophole, a tiny crack in the armor of the treaty, and through that crack, they would unleash a predator the world had never seen before, a ship that didn't fit any existing category, a ship that would become a ghost, a raider, a legend. They called it a Panzerschiff, or armored ship. The British, with a mixture of grudging respect and alarm, would give it a much catchier name: the pocket battleship. And the most successful, most feared of them all, was the Admiral Scheer. This is the story of a ship born from defiance. The Deutschland-class cruisers were a masterclass in naval engineering and creative interpretation of treaty law. The challenge for German designers was immense. Build a warship that adhered to the 10,000-ton limit, but could still project power far beyond Germany's shores. The solution was a radical hybrid. They took the firepower of a battleship and crammed it onto the hull of a cruiser. The heart of this new beast was its main armament: 6 massive 28 centimeters, or 11-inch, guns, mounted in 2 triple turrets. These were guns far more powerful than anything carried by a conventional heavy cruiser, whose typical 8-inch guns were simply outmatched in range and destructive power. This gave the pocket battleships a decisive advantage. Any Allied cruiser fast enough to chase them down would be sailing into a fight it couldn't possibly win. It would be utterly outgunned. Conversely, any battleship with guns big enough to threaten them, like Britain's Nelson class with its 16-inch cannons, was significantly slower. The pocket battleship could simply turn its stern to the enemy and run, dictating the terms of any engagement. It was a brilliant, if specialized, design philosophy. Outgun what you can't outrun, and outrun what you can't outgun. To achieve this incredible balance of speed and power, within the strict weight limit, German engineers had to innovate. Traditional shipbuilding methods were thrown out. Instead of heavy riveting, the hull of the Admiral Scheer and her sisters was almost entirely electrically welded. This was a revolutionary technique for the time, shaving off hundreds of tons of weight that could then be reinvested into armor and armament. The propulsion system was equally groundbreaking. Instead of heavy, thirsty steam turbines, the Scheer was powered by 8 massive MAN 9-cylinder 2-stroke diesel engines. This choice was crucial. Diesels offered an unparalleled operational range. The Admiral Scheer could travel over 10,000 nautical miles, 19,000 kilometers, at a cruising speed of 20 knots without refueling. This was a range that dwarfed that of most Allied warships, making the Scheer an ideal long-distance commerce raider, capable of disappearing into the vastness of the Atlantic for months at a time. Laid down in Wilhelmshaven in June 1931 and launched in April 1933, she was a sleek, modern vessel that looked every bit the predator she was designed to be. When she was commissioned into the Kriegsmarine in November 1934, the world took notice. A new kind of threat was loose on the high seas. Long before the storm of World War II broke across Europe, the Admiral Scheer received her baptism of fire in the murky waters of the Spanish Civil War. In 1936, Germany, along with other European powers, formed the so-called non-intervention patrol to possibly prevent the flow of arms into war-torn Spain. In reality, it was a thinly veiled opportunity for Hitler to support General Franco's nationalists and for the fledgling Kriegsmarine to gain invaluable operational experience. The Admiral Scheer was deployed to the Mediterranean, conducting patrols and showing the swastika flag in Spanish waters. The atmosphere was tense, a prelude to a much larger conflict. The breaking point came on May 29, 1937. The Scheer's sister ship, the Deutschland, was lying at anchor off Ibiza when two bombers from the Spanish Republican Air Force screamed in from the sky. They dropped their payloads, and the bombs tore into the ship, killing 31 German sailors and wounding over 70. Back in Berlin, Hitler flew into a rage. He demanded immediate and brutal retaliation. The order was relayed to the commander of the Admiral Scheer, Captain Otto Ciliax. His target was the Republican-held port city of Almeria. On the morning of May 31st, the Admiral Scheer appeared off the coast. There was no warning. The ship's powerful 28-centimeter guns, designed to smash enemy warships, were turned on the city. For nearly an hour, the pocket battleships systematically pounded the shoreline, firing over 200 main and secondary battery shells into the port facilities, shore batteries, and surrounding buildings. The Spanish coastal guns returned fire, but their small-caliber shells were useless, splashing harmlessly into the water far short of the German warship. The bombardment was a brutal, one-sided affair. When the smoke cleared, 19 civilians were dead, 55 were wounded, and much of the city's waterfront was a ruin. The international reaction was one of outrage. The Almeria incident was condemned as an act of aggression, a clear violation of the non-intervention agreement. For Germany, however, it was a statement of intent. It demonstrated a ruthless willingness to use force, and provided the crew of the Admiral Scheer with their first bloody taste of combat. They had proven their ship's gunnery systems worked exactly as designed. The lessons learned in the calm Mediterranean waters would soon be applied to the storm-tossed convoy routes of the North Atlantic. When World War II erupted in September 1939, the Admiral Scheer was initially held back, undergoing a significant refit in early 1940. The original, straight-stemmed bow was replaced with a raked, or clipper bow, designed to improve her seakeeping in the rough northern waters. Her imposing command tower was streamlined, and her anti-aircraft armament was beefed up. By the autumn of 1940, she was ready. Command was given to Captain Theodor Kranke, a brilliant and daring strategist who would prove to be the perfect match for his ship. His mission was codenamed Operation Nord Seator, a deceptively simple name for a deadly task: break out into the North Atlantic and wreak havoc on the British convoys that were the lifeline of the Allied war effort. In late October, under the cover of foul weather, the Scheer slipped out of port. The journey through the Denmark Strait, the icy passage between Greenland and Iceland, was a nerve-wracking ordeal. The Royal Navy was on high alert, and British cruisers patrolled the area relentlessly. But luck was with Kranke. The Scheer passed through the blockade undetected, a ghost slipping into the vast hunting grounds of the Atlantic. On the afternoon of November 5, 1948, the Scheer's float plane, an Arado 196, spotted its prey. It was convoy HS-84, a sprawling formation of 37 merchant ships plodding eastward from Halifax, Canada, packed with vital supplies for Britain. The convoy's sole escort was a single vessel, the armed merchant cruiser HMS Jervis Bay. The Jervis Bay was a converted passenger liner, a relic from a bygone era. Against a pocket battleship, its 6 outdated 6-inch guns were little more than pea shooters. Its captain, 60-year-old Edward Fagan, knew he was facing certain death. As the Admiral Scheer appeared on the horizon, a sleek grey silhouette of doom, Fagan made a decision of unbelievable courage. He ordered the convoy to scatter and turned his own ship directly towards the German raider. steaming full speed ahead into the muzzles of those colossal 11-inch guns. It was a suicidal charge, a desperate gamble to buy time for the merchantman to escape. Cranky was stunned by the audacity of the attack. The Jervis Bay began firing, its shells falling hopelessly short. The Scheer responded. The first salvos were like hammer blows, tearing through the Jervis Bay's unarmored hull. Fires erupted, and the ship began to list heavily. But still she came on, guns blazing defiantly. For 22 brutal minutes, Fagan and his crew fought their impossible battle. Finally, mortally wounded and ablaze from bow to stern, HM Jervis Bay slipped beneath the waves. Captain Fagan went down with his ship and was posthumously awarded the Victoria Cross. His sacrifice was not in vain. The dying light and the smoke from the battle gave most of the convoy the cover it needed to scatter and flee into the darkness. But for Cranky, the hunt was just beginning. In the hours that followed, the Admiral Scheer stalked the dispersed ships, picking them off one by one. By the time the sun rose, 5 merchant ships had been sent to the bottom, and the convoy was shattered. The attack on X-84 sent shockwaves through the British Admiralty. All Atlantic convoys were suspended, and a massive naval force was dispatched to hunt down the lone German raider. But the Scheer was already gone, melting away into the immensity of the ocean. After the destruction of convoy HX-84, Captain Cranker knew the North Atlantic would be swarming with British hunters. So he turned south, embarking on one of the most audacious and successful commerce-raiding cruises of the entire war. The Admiral Scheer became a phantom, her location a complete mystery to the Allies. She crossed the equator and began operating in the South Atlantic, a region where shipping was less protected. Over the next few months, she captured or sank vessel after vessel. Cranky was a master of his craft. He would often use deception, approaching Allied ships under a false flag, or using captured British signal books to lure them closer, before revealing his true identity. The attacks were swift and merciless. One of his most significant prizes was the British refrigerator ship Duquesa, captured in December 1940. The ship was fully loaded with over 15 million eggs and thousands of tons of beef and other foodstuffs. For the crew of the Scheer, who had been living on iron rations, it was a banquet. More importantly, the Duquesa became a floating pantry. Cranky had the ship sail to a remote, secret location in the mid-Atlantic, a clandestine rendezvous point for the German raider fleet. There, the Admiral Scheer met up with other German surface raiders, like the Thor and the Penguin, and the supply ship Nordmark. They resupplied, shared intelligence, and transferred prisoners taken from their sunken victims. The Duquesa provided fresh food for thousands of German sailors for months, earning it the nickname, the mother of all supply ships. With the Royal Navy searching frantically for him in the Atlantic, Cranky made another bold move. He rounded the Cape of Good Hope and slipped into the Indian Ocean. This was a direct challenge to British naval supremacy in a theater they considered their own. Patrolling the shipping lanes off the coast of Madagascar and East Africa, the Scheer continued her rampage, sinking several more ships and spreading panic throughout the region. The British were forced to divert precious naval assets from other theaters to protect their vital shipping routes to India and the Middle East. By the time the Admiral Scheer finally turned for home in early 1941, her achievements were staggering. In a single patrol lasting 161 days, she had steamed over 46,000 nautical miles, 85,000 kilometers, an incredible feat of endurance for both ship and crew. She had sunk or captured 16 enemy ships, totaling 113,223 gross register tons. This made the Admiral Scheer, by a wide margin, the most successful capital ship surface raider of World War II. Her cruise had been a masterclass in stealth, strategy, and mechanical reliability, demonstrating the devastating potential of the pocket battleship concept. The ghost of the Atlantic had proven to be very real indeed. The return journey was just as perilous as the breakout. British hunting groups, now aware of the Scheer's general location, were closing the net. Captain Cranker had to navigate through enemy-controlled waters. once again relying on foul weather, deception, and sheer luck. In a final act of daring, he guided his ship through the Denmark Strait for a second time, slipping past the patrols and arriving back in Germany on April 1st, 1941. He and his crew were received as national heroes. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels hailed the cruise as a monumental victory, a testament to German naval prowess. But the golden age of the surface raider was already coming to an end. The sinking of the battleship Bismarck, just a month later, hunted down by a massive Royal Navy task force and crippled by carrier-based aircraft, demonstrated the growing vulnerability of large surface ships operating alone. The development of advanced radar and the expansion of Allied air cover were closing the windows of opportunity for commerce raiding. After her triumphant return, the Admiral Scheer was deployed to a new, harsher theater of war, the Arctic. Her mission now was to attack the Arctic convoys, the heavily defended flotillas carrying vital war materials from Britain and the United States to the Soviet Union. This was a different kind of warfare. The enemy wasn't lone merchant ships, but dense screens of destroyers and cruisers, often under the watchful eye of the Royal Navy's home fleet. In July 1942, the Scheer was part of a powerful German squadron that sorted to attack the ill-fated convoy PQ-17. The mere presence of these German capital ships was enough to cause the British Admiralty to issue the disastrous order for the convoy to scatter, leading to its near-total destruction by U-heights and aircraft. The Scheer herself never even fired a shot. A month later, in August 1942, the ship embarked on its own offensive, Operation Vinderland. The goal was to penetrate the Kara Sea north of Siberia and disrupt Soviet shipping. It was a frustrating and largely fruitless expedition. The Arctic ice was a constant danger, fog hampered visibility, and Soviet shipping proved to be elusive. The Scheer's only significant success was the sinking of the armed Soviet icebreaker Siberyakov, which fought back bravely before being overwhelmed. After a brief and inconclusive bombardment of a weather station on Dixon Island, the operation was called off. The Admiral Scheer returned to Norway, her Arctic foray a stark illustration of the changing naval landscape. The days of the lone, globe-trotting raider were over. The war at sea was now dominated by submarine wolfbacks and massive fleet actions, arenas where a pocket battleship was at a distinct disadvantage. The harsh realities of the Arctic front had shown that even a ghost could be caged. The once mighty hunter was now feeling more like the hunted, its role in the grand strategy of the war rapidly diminishing. By 1943, with the tide of the war turning decisively against Germany, the Admiral Scheer was withdrawn from frontline service in the Arctic. She returned to the relative safety of the Baltic Sea, where she was relegated to the inglorious role of a training ship. For over a year, the once feared raider spent her days conducting drills and exercises, her powerful guns silent, her glory days a fading memory for her new crew of young cadets. But the war was not yet finished with the old ship. In late 1944, the relentless advance of the Soviet Red Army pushed the German front back to the shores of the Baltic. Trapped German army units fought desperate rearguard actions, and the Kriegsmarine was called upon to provide fire support. The Admiral Scheer was reactivated for one final combat role. From the autumn of 1944 into the early months of 1945, the pocket battleship steamed up and down the Baltic coast, her 11-inch guns, once the terror of merchant shipping, now serving as heavy mobile artillery. She unleashed devastating barrages on advancing Soviet tank columns and troop concentrations, providing a crucial lifeline for the beleaguered German soldiers on the ground. The constant firing took a tremendous toll on the ship. The rifled liners inside the barrels of her main guns, each designed for a limited number of full-charge shots, were completely worn out. Her accuracy suffered, and her firepower was diminished. By March 1945, the guns were so eroded that a complete replacement of the barrel liners was necessary. With her primary weapon system effectively useless, the weary warship set sail for her final voyage, to the naval shipyard in the port of Kiel. The Kiel of April 1945 was a vision of hell. The city, a major German naval base, had been systematically flattened by years of Allied bombing. By night, the British Royal Air Force Bomber Command arrived. By day, the American 8th Air Force. The sky was a permanent haze of smoke and anti-aircraft fire. The Admiral Scheer lay docked in the shipyard, a wounded giant awaiting surgery she would never receive. On the night of April 9, 1945, the air raid sirens wailed once more. Over 300 RAF bombers were inbound, and their primary targets were the last remnants of the German fleet in the harbor. This was no ordinary raid. The bombers carried tallboy bombs, massive 12,000-pound, 5,400-kilogram seismic weapons, designed not just to hit a target, but to obliterate it through a devastating earthquake effect. As the bombs rained down, the Scheer was rocked by near misses that shook her from keel to mast. Then, she suffered at least one direct hit, and possibly several more. The massive explosions tore through her decks and hull. The damage was catastrophic. Water poured into the ship, and she quickly developed a severe list. Within minutes, the legendary pocket battleship, the ship that had eluded the entire Royal Navy for months on end, capsized at her moorings and sank into the shallow waters of the harbor. Her superstructure was wrecked, and her hull rested upside down in the mud. Over 30 of her crew went down with her. When the war ended just a few weeks later, the wreck of the Admiral Scheer remained a ghostly, overturned presence in the ruined port. The British occupation authorities, faced with the monumental task of rebuilding Kiel, had to decide what to do with the sunken giant. Salvaging and scrapping the entire vessel was deemed too difficult and expensive. So, a more pragmatic, if less dignified, solution was chosen. The parts of the ship that protruded from the water were partially dismantled, and then the inner part of the harbor basin was filled in. Rubble from the bombed-out city, debris, and earth were bulldozed over the wreck. The Admiral Scheer was buried. Today, the area is a quiet park and a naval arsenal. There is no grand monument, no marker to indicate that beneath the peaceful ground lies the hull of one of the most famous warships of the Second World War. It's a strangely fitting end for a ship that lived its life in the shadows. From a loophole in a treaty to a ghost of the oceans, and finally to a buried titan, the Admiral Scheer's story is a complete arc of naval warfare in the 20th century. She was a marvel of engineering, a ruthless and effective predator, and a testament to the fact that even when the rules are written to chain you down, innovation and daring can still forge a legend. The career of the Admiral Scheer is a stark reminder that sometimes the most dangerous weapon isn't the biggest, but the one that breaks all the rules. Her story is one of clever design, bold strategy, and a final, inglorious end beneath the very city that gave her life. It makes you wonder what other incredible machines of war have stories just as epic, waiting to be uncovered. If you've enjoyed this deep dive into naval history, and you want to be on board for our next mission, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Hitting that button is the best way to ensure you don't miss our upcoming explorations. And we want to hear from you. What piece of military history, legendary machine, or untold story should we investigate next? Let us know in the comments. Your idea could be our next feature. Thanks for watching.